It was one of those freezing winter nights when life seemed colder than the weather itself. The streets were quiet, blanketed in snow, and the world felt like it had stopped moving. Inside a small, run-down house at the edge of town, a single dad named Mark sat by a weekly burning fire, staring at the last log of wood he had left. His 7-year-old son, Eli, was fast asleep under a pile of old blankets. Mark sighed, wondering how he was going to keep the fire burning through the night. Just then, a knock echoed through the quiet room. 3 soft, hesitant knocks that didn't sound like trouble, but like desperation. When Mark opened the door, he saw a young woman standing there, shivering from head to toe. Her hair was damp with melting snow, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "Please. I just need a place to stay for the night." Before we dive into this touching story of compassion and fate, don't forget to hit subscribe and tap the like button to support our channel, Heart Story USA, where we share real and inspiring stories that remind us that kindness still exists. Comment "Kindness wins" if you believe good deeds always find their way back to us. Mark hesitated for a moment. He didn't know this girl, she could be anyone. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of fear and exhaustion, that reminded him of himself when life had pushed him to the edge. So, despite his empty wallet and the bitter cold, he stepped aside and said softly, "Come in before you freeze out there." The young woman nodded with tears in her eyes and stepped inside. Mark gave her the only clean towel he had, some old clothes from his late wife, and a bowl of soup that he had planned to save for tomorrow. She thanked him quietly, her voice trembling as she said, "You have no idea how much this means to me." As she ate, Mark sat across the table, watching her carefully. She looked out of place in his tiny home, her soft hands, manicured nails, and the faint scent of expensive perfume hinted that she wasn't used to struggling like this. Still, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "You can sleep on the couch. It's not much, but it's warm." That night, while Mark slept lightly in his small bedroom, the girl lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling. She couldn't believe this stranger had shown her such kindness without asking for anything. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. The next morning, Mark woke early to make pancakes from the last bit of flour he had left. When the smell reached the living room, the girl slowly got up. She looked surprised and a little embarrassed. "You didn't have to make breakfast," she said softly. Mark smiled. "Everyone deserves a warm meal. Besides, Eli won't let anyone skip breakfast." Eli giggled from the table, waving shyly. "Hi. What's your name?" The girl hesitated for a second, then smiled back. "I'm Anna." As they ate, Anna learned that Mark was a widower. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, and since then, he'd been doing his best to raise Eli on his own. He worked at a car repair shop, barely earning enough to cover rent and food. Still, his house was filled with warmth, something Anna hadn't felt in a long time. When she finished breakfast, Anna stood up and said, "I should go. I don't want to trouble you anymore." Mark shrugged. It wasn't trouble. "Just promise me one thing, stay safe." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I will. And, thank you, for everything." Days passed, and Mark went back to his usual routine, long shifts at work, quiet dinners with Eli, and nights wondering how long he could keep things going. He didn't expect to see Anna again. But 1 week later, a black SUV pulled up outside his old house. Mark stepped out to see who it was, wiping grease from his hands. Out came Anna, but this time she looked completely different. Her clothes were clean, her hair styled, and a tall man in a suit stood beside her. "Mark," she said with a bright smile. "I hope I'm not intruding." Mark blinked in surprise. "Anna? What are you doing here?" The man beside her extended his hand. "I'm Richard Hartwell, Anna's father." Mark froze. Hartwell. The name rang a bell. It was the same last name on the sign of the biggest business complex downtown, Hartwell Industries. Anna stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "When I ran away that night, I just needed to know that there was still goodness left in the world. My father and I had a terrible argument, and I didn't want to be around anyone. You didn't know me, but you helped me anyway. You didn't ask who I was, or what I had. You just cared." Mark didn't know what to say. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly, glancing down at the ground. "I just did what anyone should do." Anna shook her head. "No. Most people would have turned me away. You didn't." Then Richard stepped forward, his expression full of gratitude. "Mr. Evans, I owe you more than you know. My daughter could have been in real danger that night. But she found safety because of you." He reached into his coat pocket and handed Mark an envelope. "Please, accept this. It's just a small token of appreciation." Mark opened it and his hands started trembling. Inside was a check with more zeros than he'd ever seen in his life. "I can't accept this," he said quickly, trying to hand it back. "I didn't do it for money." Richard smiled warmly. "I know. That's exactly why you deserve it." Anna added softly, "Please, Mark. You and Eli gave me hope. Let us do something for you." Months later, Mark's life had changed. He didn't move to a mansion or buy fancy cars, but he finally had enough to fix up his house, pay off his debts, and start a small auto repair business of his own. He called it Eli's Garage, after his son. Anna visited often. Sometimes she'd bring her father's car for servicing, but more often she'd just stop by to have coffee and talk. She and Eli became close, like family. And through it all, Mark never forgot what that night had taught him: kindness doesn't need to come from wealth. It comes from the heart. One evening, as the sun set behind the repaired house, Mark sat on the porch with Eli and Anna. The little boy looked up and said, "Dad, are we rich now?" Mark chuckled and pulled him close. "No, buddy. We're just lucky." Anna smiled, looking out at the golden sky. "Maybe both," she whispered. Years later, Eli would grow up to tell his own kids the story of how a stranger came to their door one snowy night and how his dad's kindness changed their lives forever. Because sometimes, one simple act of compassion can rewrite someone's story. And sometimes, it even writes your own. Conclusion. In a world that often feels cold and distant, Mark's story reminds us that kindness costs nothing, but its impact is priceless. You never know what someone is going through or who they really are beneath the surface. One small act of generosity can ripple through lives in ways you'd never imagine. So next time you have the chance to help someone, do it. Not for reward, not for recognition, but because the world could always use one more heart like yours. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Heart Story USA for more uplifting tales that prove kindness will always find its way home.